The fluorescent lights of Riverside Medical Center cast harsh shadows across Dr. Nora Parker's face as she completed her notes on her latest patient. 16 hours into what should have been a 12-hour shift, exhaustion clouded her vision, but she couldn't afford the luxury of rest. Her research on traumatic brain injuries in underserved communities wouldn't fund itself, and these extra shifts made it possible. Dr. Parker, trauma coming in. 5 minutes, called Antonio, the charge nurse who had become her closest ally during these endless nights. Nora drained her lukewarm coffee and straightened her white coat. What are we looking at? Car accident. Male, mid-30s. Possible head trauma. The ambulance bay doors burst open, and Nora's training took over. The patient was stabilized, scanned, and prepped for observation with practiced efficiency. As she finished documenting the case, she became aware of an unfamiliar presence in the emergency department, a tall figure in an impeccably tailored suit who seemed distinctly out of place among the controlled chaos. "Who's that?" she whispered. "To Antonio." "Julian Westbrook," he replied with a meaningful look. Hospital board member, tech industry fortune, notorious for surprise inspections. Nora sighed. The last thing she needed was a wealthy businessman evaluating her performance. While she was running on caffeine and determination, she turned back to her charts, deliberately ignoring the newcomer, but moments later felt someone standing directly behind her. "Impressive work with the trauma patient, doctor." His voice was deep and carried an unexpected warmth. Nora turned, finding herself looking up into eyes the color of aged whiskey. Julian Westbrook was younger than she'd expected, perhaps. Early 40s, with dark hair threaded with silver at the temples, and a face that spoke of both privilege and intelligence. "Mr. Westbrook," she acknowledged with professional courtesy. "This is an unusual time for a board inspection." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I find midnight reveals truths that daylight obscures, like overworked residents and understaffed departments." She challenged, too exhausted to be diplomatic. Instead of offense, his smile widened. "Exactly like that. May I buy you coffee? The cafeteria makes a surprisingly decent espresso at this hour." Nora hesitated. "I'm on shift. Antonio mentioned you were due for a break 20 minutes ago." She shot a betrayed look at the nurse, who shrugged unapologetically. 15 minutes later, Nora found herself seated across from Julian in the nearly empty cafeteria, cradling a cup of coffee that was indeed surprisingly good. "Your file says you're researching traumatic brain injuries in economically disadvantaged communities," he said, watching her with unsettling intensity. "You've read my file? I make it my business to know the exceptional people working in my hospital." "It's not your hospital," Nora countered. "It belongs to the patients." Julian leaned forward. "That's exactly what makes you interesting, Dr. Parker. Everyone else here is trying to impress me. I'm trying to save lives and advance medical science. Your impression of me is irrelevant." "And yet," he said softly, "here we are." Something electric passed between them, a recognition that transcended their different worlds. For a moment, Nora forgot he was a powerful board member, and she was a chronically overworked doctor. She simply saw a man looking at her with genuine interest, and it had been so long since anyone had truly seen her. Her pager broke the spell, buzzing insistently. "I have to go," she said, rising quickly. Julian stood as well. "Have dinner with me tomorrow." "That would be inappropriate." "Because I'm on the board? Or because you're afraid of what might happen if you say yes?" Nora's pulse quickened traitorously. "Both. 7 o'clock. Ellison's on 5th Street. He handed her a business card. "Sometimes inappropriate choices lead to extraordinary outcomes, Dr. Parker." As she hurried back to the emergency department, Nora told herself she wouldn't go. It was professional suicide, an unnecessary complication in her already complex life. Yet as dawn broke and she finally left the hospital, Julian Westbrook's card remained in her pocket, and the possibility of tomorrow night lingered in her mind like a dangerous promise. Nora smoothed her navy blue dress as she waited at Ellison's, an upscale restaurant that made her feel distinctly out of place. The mater d' had escorted her to a private corner booth with a knowing smile that suggested Julian Westbrook often. "Entertained here." "You came." Julian's voice carried genuine surprise as he approached, dressed in a charcoal suit that accentuated his broad shoulders. "Against my better judgment," Nora admitted, taking a sip of water to steady herself. "The best. Decisions often are." Julian settled across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. "You look beautiful." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. "This isn't a date, Mr. Westbrook." "Julian, please." "And what would you call it?" "A professional discussion about neurological research." His smile was disarming. "Of course." To Nora's surprise, Julian asked thoughtful questions about her work, demonstrating knowledge that went beyond cursory research. Their conversation flowed easily from medical innovations to hospital politics to books they'd both read. By dessert, Nora found herself laughing at his dry observations about the healthcare system's absurdities. "Why neurology?" Julian asked. Refilling her wine glass, Nora hesitated before sharing the truth. "My father. He suffered a traumatic brain injury when I was 12. A construction accident. We lived in West Side, the underserved district." She nodded. "The care he received was inadequate. He was just another poor patient. I watched how the system failed him, how his recovery stalled because we couldn't afford specialized treatments." Julian's hand moved across the table, resting lightly on hers. "Is that why you work those punishing night shifts? To fund your research? Someone has to fight for those patients." His fingers tightened slightly around hers. "Your passion is extraordinary." The air between them changed, charged with something beyond professional admiration. When Julian insisted on driving her home, Nora knew she should refuse. Instead, she found herself directing him to her modest apartment building. "This isn't where I expected the evening to end," she admitted as they sat in his luxury car. Julian's gaze was intent. "Where did you expect it to end?" With a handshake and a polite goodbye, he leaned closer. "Is that what you want?" Nora's medical training had taught her to analyze risk, to make rational decisions. But there was nothing rational about the way her body responded to his proximity. "No," she whispered. His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with an intensity that made her forget every reason this was a terrible idea. When he finally pulled away, both were breathing heavily. "I should go," Nora said, though she made no move to leave. Julian traced her cheekbone with his thumb. "Or I could come up." The next morning, Nora woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and Julian watching her from beside the bed, already dressed in fresh clothes. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. She should have many. Instead, she found herself reaching for him. "Not yet." Over the following weeks, their relationship evolved in stolen moments, late dinners after her shifts, early mornings before hospital rounds, weekends at his lake house where no one knew them. Julian's world of wealth and influence contrasted sharply with her practical existence, yet in private they connected as equals. "You've changed me," Julian confessed one evening as they lay tangled in his sheets. "I used to see the hospital as an investment. Now I see the people." Nora ran her fingers along his jaw. "And I used to see board members as obstacles. Now I see at least one exception." Neither spoke the word love, though it hovered between them, unacknowledged and dangerous. Their relationship remained secret by mutual agreement, Nora to protect her professional credibility. Julian, for reasons he kept vague, but secrets had a way of unraveling. And on a rainy Tuesday, Nora overheard two board members discussing Julian's hospital restructuring plan, a plan that would slash funding to community outreach programs and redirect resources to more profitable departments, the very programs that served patients like her father. Rain lashed against the windows of Julian's downtown penthouse as Nora paced across Italian marble floors that suddenly felt cold beneath her feet. "You're eliminating the Community Neurological Services Program?" Her voice trembled with barely contained fury. "That program serves hundreds of patients who have nowhere else to go." Julian loosened his tie, his expression carefully neutral. "It's a board decision, Nora. The numbers don't support continuing." "The numbers?" She interrupted. "These are people, Julian. Real people with real lives who depend on these services. The hospital is losing millions. We need to redirect resources to departments that can sustain themselves." Nora stopped pacing, the full weight of realization crashing down. "This was your plan all along. Even while you were in my bed, listening to me talk about my father, about my research, you were planning to cut the very programs I've devoted my life to." "That's not fair." Julian's voice hardened. "My personal feelings for you have nothing to do with necessary business decisions." "Personal feelings?" Nora laughed bitterly. "What exactly are those feelings, Julian? In 6 weeks, you've never once defined what this is between us." He approached her, reaching for her hands. "You know how I feel about you." She pulled away. "No, I don't. I know you enjoy my company. I know the sex is good. I know you find my passion extraordinary, but apparently not extraordinary enough to prevent you from destroying everything I care about." "You're being emotional," Julian said, his tone slipping into the boardroom authority she'd never heard directed at her before. "The restructuring plan allocates resources more efficiently. Your research can continue under the new model." "My research isn't the point. What about the patients? What about people like my father, who will fall through the cracks?" Julian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "The hospital isn't a charity, Nora. We can't save everyone." The words hung between them like a physical barrier. "That's the difference between us," she said quietly. "I became a doctor precisely because I believe we should try." She moved to gather her things, pain replacing anger as the adrenaline ebbed. "Where are you going?" Julian asked, suddenly looking less like the confident businessman and more like a man afraid of losing something precious. "Home." This was a mistake from the beginning. He caught her arm. "Nora, please. We can discuss this rationally." "There's nothing to discuss. You've made your priorities clear, and I'm not among them." "That's not true." Julian's voice cracked slightly. "You've become more important to me than you know." For a moment, Nora wavered. The pain in his eyes seemed genuine, and the memory of his tenderness in private moments made her heart ache. But some divides were too wide to cross. "If that were true," she said softly, "you would understand why I can't be with someone who values profit over people." The elevator ride down from his penthouse was the longest of her life. By the time she reached the lobby, tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. She had patients who needed her, research that mattered. Julian Westbrook had been a beautiful distraction, nothing more. She almost believed it. 3 weeks passed. Nora threw herself into work with renewed dedication, organizing community protests against the restructuring plan and recruiting other doctors to speak out. If Julian had changed her, making her believe in possibilities beyond her carefully ordered life, she had also changed him, making him question the values that had guided his success. Alone in his penthouse, Julian stared at financial projections that once seemed unambiguous. Now he saw faces behind the numbers patients, like Nora's father, communities without options. The hollowness in his chest since she'd walked away wouldn't subside, no matter how he tried to rationalize their incompatibility. For the first time in his successful life, Julian Westbrook wondered if he had been measuring value by entirely the wrong metrics. The community clinic in West Side District operated on goodwill and determination. Nora volunteered her Saturdays here, seeing patients who couldn't afford specialized neurological care elsewhere. Today had been particularly difficult. 3 new traumatic brain injury cases, all lacking insurance for proper rehabilitation. Dr. Parker? The clinic receptionist poked her head into the cramped exam room. There's someone asking for you. Says it's urgent. Expecting another patient, Nora was startled to find Julian standing in the small waiting area, looking out of place in casual clothes that probably cost more than the clinic's monthly rent. What are you doing here? She asked, maintaining professional distance despite her racing pulse. I needed to see you. His voice was quieter than she remembered. And I needed to see this place. How did you find me? I asked Antonio. Nora crossed her arms. If this is about convincing me to stop opposing the restructuring plan, you're wasting your time. It's not. Julian glanced around the modest clinic. Can we talk somewhere private? She led him to a small break room, hyper-aware of curious eyes following them. I've been visiting community clinics for the past 2 weeks, Julian said once. They were alone, talking to patients, observing treatments, learning. Nora leaned against a worn countertop. Why? Because you were right. The admission seemed to cost him. I've been making decisions based on spreadsheets without understanding the human impact. Before she could respond, the door burst open. Dr. Parker, Mr. Reyes is seizing. Nora rushed to the examination room where her elderly patient convulsed on the table. Call an ambulance. And get me diazepam, Julian finished, already opening cabinets. Finding the medication, he handed it to her with the efficiency of someone who understood emergency medicine. Together, they stabilized Mr. Reyes before the ambulance arrived. Working alongside Julian, Nora glimpsed a different man than either the suave businessman or the passionate lover she had known. This Julian was focused, capable, and genuinely concerned for the patient. Hours later, after ensuring Mr. Reyes would recover, they found themselves sitting on a bench outside the clinic. Where did you learn emergency protocols? Nora asked. I was pre-med before business school. Another life. Julian looked at his hands. Watching you today reminded me why I wanted to be a doctor in the first place. The revelation shifted something between them. Nora saw vulnerability in Julian she'd never witnessed before, layers beneath his confident exterior. I've withdrawn the restructuring plan, he said quietly. What? The board meeting yesterday was contentious, but I convinced them to try a different approach. We're establishing a community medicine endowment instead, with initial funding of $20 million. Nora stared at him in disbelief. Why would you do that? Because you changed me. Julian finally met her eyes. You made me see that success means nothing if it comes at the expense of people who need help most. Julian, I'm not asking for anything, he interrupted. I just wanted you to know that your work matters, that you were heard. As he stood to leave, Nora caught his hand. The touch sent familiar electricity through both of them. Have dinner with me tonight, she said impulsively. His smile was cautious. Are you sure? No, she admitted. But I think we have more to talk about. That night, over simple food at a neighborhood restaurant, far from his usual haunts, they began rebuilding something different than before a relationship based on honesty rather than attraction alone. Julian spoke of his estranged family, of the pressure to succeed that had driven his every decision. Nora shared her fears of failing the patients who counted on her. When he finally kissed her, outside her apartment door, it felt like beginning again. I missed you, he whispered against her lips. Nora drew him inside, knowing they still had mountains to overcome, but willing for the first time to believe they might find a path forward together. 6 months later, Riverside Medical Center's annual charity gala transformed the hospital atrium into an elegant wonderland of lights and flowers. As keynote speaker, Nora stood at the podium in a deep green gown, addressing the city's wealthiest donors with newfound confidence. The West Side Neurological Center has already treated over 200 patients who previously had no access to specialized care. She concluded, "Tonight, we're not just raising money, we're raising the standard of what community medicine can achieve." Thank you. Applause filled the room as Nora stepped away from the microphone. Julian waited at the bottom of the steps, pride evident in his expression. "Magnificent," he murmured, taking her hand. "You've inspired record donations tonight." Their relationship had evolved in ways neither had anticipated. Julian had resigned from the hospital board to avoid conflicts of interest, focusing instead on his foundation's healthcare initiatives. Working alongside Nora had given him purpose beyond wealth accumulation, while his business acumen had helped her navigate the politics of medical funding. "Dance with me?" he asked as the orchestra began playing. On the dance floor, surrounded by colleagues who had witnessed their professional collaboration but knew nothing of their private life, Julian held her closer than propriety suggested. "Have I told you today that I love you?" he whispered against her hair. Nora smiled. "Only twice." "You're slipping." The words, once so difficult for both of them, now came easily. Their different worlds had gradually merged. Julian spending evenings in her modest apartment, Nora occasionally enjoying the luxury of his penthouse. They had built something neither had believed possible, a partnership of equals despite their different backgrounds. "I have something to show you," Julian said as the dance ended. He led her through French doors onto a balcony overlooking the hospital gardens. "What are we doing out here?" Nora asked, wrapping her arms around herself against the evening chill. Julian removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. 6 months ago, I realized I'd been measuring success all wrong. Money, influence, power, none of it mattered without purpose. "Julian, you gave me that purpose," he continued. "You showed me what it means to truly make a difference." The garden lights illuminated his face as he reached into his pocket and lowered himself to one knee. Nora's breath caught as he opened a small velvet box. "I thought I had everything before I met you," Julian said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I was wrong. You've taught me that real wealth is measured in lives changed, in purpose fulfilled, in love freely given." The ring caught the light, a simple emerald surrounded by diamonds, elegant without ostentation. "Nora Parker, will you marry me? Not as Julian Westbrook's wife, but as my partner in everything that matters?" Tears blurred Nora's vision as memories flashed through her mind. Their first meeting in the hospital, arguments over values, reconciliation, and the gradual building of trust. They had transformed each other in ways neither could have predicted. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to embrace her, applause erupted behind them. They turned to find hospital staff and gala attendees watching through the glass doors, Antonio giving a thumbs up from the front. Julian laughed against her lips. "So much for our private moment." "Privacy is overrated," Nora replied, kissing him without reservation. "Besides, these people are our family now." Later that night, as they walked through the quiet hospital corridors where their story had begun, Julian stopped beside the emergency department entrance. "This is where I first saw you," he said softly. "You were saving a life and completely ignoring me." Nora smiled at the memory. "I thought you were just another rich board member doing a perfunctory inspection. And I thought you were just another doctor. We were both so wrong." She touched the ring on her finger, still adjusting to its weight and meaning. "Do you think we can really make this work?" Your world and mine are still so different. Julian took both her hands in his. Our world stopped being separate months ago. We've created something new together. As if to prove his point, Dr. Foster approached them with an urgent chart, addressing them jointly about a complex case. They moved seamlessly into professional mode, their personal relationship temporarily set aside as they focused on the patient's needs. Hours later, after saving a young woman from a potentially devastating brain hemorrhage, they stood together in the physician's lounge, exhausted but satisfied. "This is us," Julian said, gesturing to their rumpled formal wear and the medical charts between them. The gala and the emergency room. Champagne and coffee at midnight. It's all part of who we are together. Nora leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I'd find someone who understood both sides of my life. I never thought I'd find someone who would challenge me to be better," Julian countered, kissing her forehead. "Yet here we are." Outside the window, dawn broke over the city they both served in different ways, casting golden light across the hospital that had brought them together. What had begun as an unlikely attraction between two people from different worlds had transformed into something neither had been looking for, but both now cherished, a partnership of purpose, passion, and promise that would continue to heal far more than just their own hearts.